Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Tucker Tuesday. What's going on out there, chat? Happy Tuesday. Hope everyone's having a lovely, fantastic day out there today. Sorry, had to clear my throat there real quick. Let's see who we've got hanging out in the chat. Bookworm, hello. J. Kate, Alec, Faustonia, Shiru, Thomas, Advocus, Joshua, Tier. I bet Tier. That sounds like a fucking handful. Mike Savage, Faustonia, again. Fake Gamer Cat. Man, everybody out in this bitch. What up? Invictus 2, hello. That's an interesting name. What happened to Invictus 1? Wrecked Mech, hey. Blitz, how's it going? Caro? Present. I am here. Dr. Sin, I am here for class. Cannibalistic Wizard, hello. Algorithm-generated anime girl, hello. Ooh, what's going on, guys? How we doing? Hope everyone's having a lovely, lovely, lovely day. I'm kind of in a mood today. I don't know why. I feel down, I guess. Literally no idea why, but here we are. Whatever. What can you do? This is gonna be maybe a little bit of a shorter stream today, because there's only one video I'm really wanting to watch, and I have a feeling I didn't watch it. I like to watch these for the first time going into it with you guys, but I have a feeling that this is going to be a little bit more of kind of what we talked about Friday. It's just random shit, unbelievable shit from the NSA or, intelligence operatives, where it's just like, yeah, no, Russia has space nukes. There's something very bad coming, so you need to give over a little bit more of your freedom. Just another guy, what's going on? I'm in a foul mood every day. I get to be harassed by scammers first thing. Dude, so many scam calls. It's insane. Watch some Amberson. She'll either bore you or piss you off. I'm already not in a good mood. The stream cannot end till Knights of the Diamond Spoon is replaced. Yeah, I don't know about that one, man. I don't know how that's going to work out.
Be quiet! Shut up! Be quiet!
Thank you. Oh, I don't even have the thing open. Whoopsie poopsie. What country isn't trying to sneaky put nukes in space? Just checking in while I do chest day. Nice. I haven't been to the gym in 2 fucking days. I'm like crawling out of my fucking skin, dude. I've been with you for years, rarely donate. I'm a poor boy, but I got a promotion and a pay raise. Things are looking up right now. And I got a new truck in my sights, new to me. It's a mint 87 Chevy with only 28,000 miles on it. Ooh, I would love to see a picture of that. That sounds awesome. And I know, Bishop, you've been here forever and a half, man. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And congrats. Let's get hearts in the chat for Bishop with the promotion. Good job, man. Congratulations. That's awesome. No, dude, I get them. I got one today for my senior citizen benefits. That was pretty neat. Ravon for $1 evening. Hello, sir. I don't know what Stream Boss HP is up to, because it's supposed to be 1,000 per dollar, but it is not 1,000 per dollar. It very often is very different. But there would be a nice little chunk of change to replace the first ever Night of the Awoo. That he unlocked the new Dono Sunday, and boy howdy was it dope. It's a fun little dono. What up, Baba Yaga? How we doing? I mess with scammers. I don't even waste my time. I get the call and I answer it and I hear what it is and then I just hang up, block the number. I don't have the RAM available right now to mess with them. It's just not there for me. I don't know, man. It doesn't matter. But guys, please smash the like button. Share it out on your social media. Streamlabs, as always, down below. Very much appreciated. Let me get a good Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Jump ahead to right now on the watch page and pause. If somebody could just drop $1, I would like to see what Streamboss HP is happening today. But all that fun, good stuff is fantastic. We're going to get to the video. This is... I got my Spicyuusy in the way. This is Tucker interviewing Mike Benz about the NSA, so this should be pretty interesting. Let's take a look.
The defining fact of the United States is freedom of speech. To the extent this country is actually exceptional, it's because we have the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. We have freedom of conscience. We can say what we really think. There's no hate speech exception to that. Just because you hate what somebody else thinks.
Well, hate speech is not a real thing. Things can be said hatefully. Things can be said with malice and intent to hurt feelings. But hate speech is not real. This is a shibboleth we need to just shake off and leave behind. If you want to prosecute people for stuff they say, it is only a matter of time before that same logic and that same, what's the word I'm looking for? That same prosecutorial aggressiveness is going to be used against you.
You cannot force that person to be quiet.
So you want to test on slabs? Yeah, just $1. I want to know what we're dealing with today.
Because we're citizens, not slaves. But that right, that foundational right that makes this country what it is, that right from which all other rights flow, is going away at high speed in the face of censorship. Now, modern censorship bears no resemblance to previous censorship regimes in previous countries in previous eras. Our censorship is affected on the basis of fights against disinformation and malinformation.
But then again, saying Joe Biden is corrupt and saying testing with Wick. Thank you, Fostonia. That's awesome. Let me see where we were. 3, 7, 5, 9, 8. 3, 7, 9, 3, 7, 5, 3, 7, 1. That'd be 4. It doesn't look like it doubled. So we might be okay. Thank you, Fostonia. Violence is good. I am definitely not going to be discontent by a Wick. Thank you.
And the key thing to know about these is they're everywhere. And of course, they have no reference at all to whether what you're saying is true or not. In other words, you can say something that is factually accurate and consistent with your own conscience. And in previous versions of America, you had an absolute right to say those things. But because someone doesn't like them or because they're inconvenient to whatever plan the people in power have, they can be denounced as disinformation, and you could be stripped of your right to express them, either in person or online. In fact, expressing these things can become a criminal act and is. And it's important to know, by the way, that this is not just the private sector doing this. These efforts are being directed by the U.S. government, which you pay for and at least theoretically own. It's your government.
Well, we have switched sometime in the past 20 or so years. We have switched over from the government works for the people to the people work for the government. The government does no longer serve at the behest of the people. They are not public servants. They are now 100% our overlords.
But they're stripping your rights at very high speed. Most people understand this intuitively, but they don't know how it happens. How does censorship happen? What are the mechanics of it? Mike Benz is, we can say with some confidence, the expert in the world on how this happens. Mike Benz had the cyber portfolio at the State Department. He's now executive director of Foundation for Freedom Online. And we're going to have a conversation with him about a very specific kind of censorship. By the way, we can't recommend strongly enough. If you want to know how this happens, Mike Benz, B-E-N-Z, is the man to read. But today we just want to talk about a specific kind of censorship, and that's censorship that emanates from the fabled military-industrial complex, from our defense industry and the foreign policy establishment.
Ooh, the military-industrial complex. This means that These people are really getting paid.
In Washington. That's significant now because we're on the cusp of a global war, and so you can expect censorship to increase dramatically. And so with that, here is Mike Benz, Executive Director of Foundation for Freedom Online. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. And I just can't overstate to our audience how exhaustive and comprehensive your knowledge is on this topic. It's almost unbelievable. And so if you could just walk us through how the foreign policy establishment and defense contractors and DOD and just the whole cluster, the constellation of defense-related, publicly funded institutions strip from us our freedom of speech.
Sure. You know, one of the easiest
He's so shiny. Why is he so shiny?
ways to actually start the story is really with the story of internet freedom. And it switched from internet freedom to internet censorship because free speech on the internet.
It switched from internet freedom to internet censorship because social media companies started taking more and more money from the government, therefore banning, blocking, and censoring everybody who the government didn't like. We have
an instrument of state.
Shit, that's not what I meant to click. We have seen time and time again that the Biden administration works in tandem with former Twitter, works in tandem with YouTube and all the like. Just doing a thunk, that's all.
Statecraft, almost from the outset of the privatization of the internet in 1991, we quickly discovered through the efforts of the Defense Department, the State Department, and our intelligence services that people were using the internet to congregate on blogs and forums, and free speech was championed more than anybody by the Pentagon, the State Department, and our...
When it was beneficial. Now that it's not, they're not interested.
Sort of CIA cutout NGO blob architecture as a way to support dissident groups around the world.
A way to support Awoo. Do you remember that military officer tracked down a mother on Facebook and said he was going to get law enforcement involved because he didn't like what she was saying? No, I don't remember this, but I would love an article if you've got one.
In order to help them overthrow authoritarian governments as they were sort of billed. Essentially, the internet free speech allowed kind of insta-regime change operations to be able to facilitate the foreign policy establishment's State Department agenda. Google is a great example of this. Google began as a DARPA grant by Larry Page and Sergey Brin when they were Stanford PhDs. And they got their funding as part of a joint CIA-NSA program to chart how, quote, birds of a feather flock together online through search engine aggregation. And then 1 year later, they launched Google and then became a military contractor quickly thereafter. They got Google Maps by purchasing a CIA satellite software, essentially. And the ability to track, to use free speech on the internet as a way to circumvent state control over media over in places.
Once you're able to, how do I want to word this? Once you're able to successfully control what people say to each other, but more importantly, what they see, then you're influencing what they think, therefore what they will want to say.
Like Central Asia or all around the world was seen as a way to be able to do what used to be done out of CIA station houses or out of embassies or consulates in a way that was totally turbocharged. And all of the internet free speech technology was initially created by our national security state. VPNs, virtual private networks, to hide your IP address.
You remember when the Biden administration said they were going to outlaw VPNs so they could keep a crackdown on COVID misinformation, and then immediately started using it against, what was it? Trump's followers?
Tour the dark web to be able to buy and sell goods anonymously, end-to-end encrypted chats. All of these things were created initially as DARPA projects or as joint CIA-NSA projects to be able to help intelligence-backed groups to overthrow governments that were causing a problem to the Clinton administration or the Bush administration or the Obama administration. And this plan worked magically from about 1991 until about 2014, when there began to be an about face on internet freedom and its utility. Now, the high watermark of the sort of internet free speech moment was the Arab Spring in 2011, 2012, when you had this one by one, all of the adversary governments of the Obama administration, Egypt, Tunisia, all began to be toppled in Facebook revolutions and Twitter revolutions. And you had the State Department working very closely with the social media companies to be able to keep social media online during those periods. There was a famous phone call from Google's Jared Cohen.
I remember when Russia first invaded Ukraine, the Elon Musk sent over a semi-truck full of Starlink satellites so they could stay online. Here we go. High-ranking military official called to resign after targeting mom upset over pansexual posters at school. Ooh, this is an old article. How did you remember this? Angela Reading said she was surprised and scared at their response. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Oh, wow. No. Tuxception. Damn it.
So a few days ago, a mother in New Jersey called Angela Redding found out that her child's elementary school was advertising something called pansexuality, and she thought this seems a little much for an elementary school, so she complained about it on Facebook.
Wow.
What happened next didn't used to happen in this country and never.
Oh, fuck. I hate this. I want to zoom in and see what the cards say.
We only know about it because of a Substack called Chaos and Control, which broke the story. And as we read it, we thought
this
can't
is a
be real,
safe
but
place.
it is.
Everyone is welcome.
So
the
in
US
response to Angela Redding's post, out of the blue, an Army officer at Joint Base MDL, it's a nearby military base, called Angela Redding an extremist on Facebook. That officer is called Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Schilling. Schilling then wrote on Facebook that, quote, the Joint Base leadership have had the security forces working with multiple state and local law enforcement agencies to monitor this situation. What?
Monitor the situation. So the military is involved in monitoring the situation of a mom upset on the internet. Jesus Christ. We are so fucked if there's another, actual war. A Call to Curl, I couldn't find it on Google. It was literally the first link in DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo does seem to be a little more, honest? Do you ever notice the most realistic thing about John Wick is that you never see a cop? You do see cops. Cops showed up in the first movie.
The military responded to a mom in an elementary school complaining about the sexualization of her own child. That's warranted a military response under Joe Biden? Apparently it did. Then shortly after, the chief of the North Hanover Police Department, Robert Duff, pressured Redding to delete her Facebook post. Let that sink in. The police and the military got involved because a mom wrote something on Facebook they didn't like. Today, Joint Base MDL confirmed to this show that they, quote, notified law enforcement about the social media exchange, which is common.
I remember making fun of Britain a couple of years ago for the cops showing up over somebody making an edgy joke online. Yet here we are.
Information sharing practice among law enforcement agencies. Except, wait a second, a military base is not a, quote, law enforcement agency. The purpose of the military is to defend us from foreign enemies, not to police our Facebook posts. This is mind-boggling, and we pray someone does something about it. Angela Redding is the mother who wrote that Facebook post that the military shut down. She joins us tonight. Angela, thank you so much for being brave enough to come on. Were you a little surprised that the U.S. military weighed in on your Facebook post?
I was more than surprised. I was scared. I actually pulled my kids from school the day I found out. It was mind-boggling.
How could you not? The military shows up about you making a post about your kid's school. Are you going to keep sending them to that school? Abso-fucking-lutely not.
And I was worried for them. When the U.S. military comes after you for simply raising concern about a public poster that is widely available for all to see, it's mind-boggling, as you said.
And just to be clear, you weren't threatening war. You didn't threaten to use nuclear weapons against the school, correct?
No, actually, my post was really moderate. It essentially said that I didn't think my 7-year-old was age appropriate to be exposed to words such as polysexual and pansexual. I said that all people are deserving of love and respect, that my post was very explicit about that. And still it prompted this response, and it is really scary that in this country we can't have a right to speak and raise concerns that about our—
I mean, you can, as long as it's against the right people. If you talk against, I don't know, Biden, the military, or the alphabet mafia, you are in big doo-doo.
our public education system.
You live in an area with a lot of military families. I know. I think your children's school has a lot of military families in it. I mean, doubtless you respect the military, because almost all Americans do. Did you know that they were reading your Facebook posts?
I did not, and I actually want to be really explicit. I believe that our military personnel deserves the utmost love, admiration, and respect.
Yes.
I'm a daughter of a veteran. I live in a community with the military, and these are phenomenal families. Our school district is phenomenal. The teachers in our school district are phenomenal. I think this is a rogue actor, a bad faith actor, and I don't think that we need to implicate the entire population. But I did not think that the military was monitoring mom's Facebook post. No, I did not.
No, and you would hope.
Well, I think a more honest description of what happened would be that somebody saw it and then complained to the guy. I doubt they were monitoring it. But the point still stands.
That Lieutenant Colonel Schilling would be removed from his command
Pinky.
tonight, and we'll be seeing if he is. What was the role of the police chief? Can you just tell us that quickly?
Yeah, so I actually got a call from the admin of the Facebook group. Again, this is kind of ridiculous. We're talking about this. It's a parents group that I posted on. I got a call from the admin of the Facebook group saying that the police chief contacted her to say that my post should come down. And she said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, I don't want Homeland Security coming after me. Take the post down. Like, I don't want to be dealing with this." So I agreed that the post could come down. I then contacted the police chief directly and reminded him of the First Amendment and that we shouldn't be utilizing government resources and our positions to pressure individuals to take down Facebook posts. And I also, shared with him the post that he had already seen. There was nothing wrong. It didn't violate any law. It didn't violate any Facebook rule whatsoever. So that's how that all happened.
That's insane. Holy shit. Thank you, NSA. Thank you very much. Oh, damn, we're over 10% to goal. Nicely done, guys. Thank you very much. Incredibly awesome. Hey, how's that like ratio looking, though? Terrible. Smash that like. Share, do the sharing with the thing and the other thing.
To Twitter to not do their scheduled maintenance so that the preferred opposition group in Iran would be able to use Twitter to win that election. So it was free speech was an instrument of statecraft from the national security state to begin with. All of that architecture, all of the NGOs, the relationships between the tech companies and the national security state had been long established for freedom. In 2014, after the coup in Ukraine, there was an unexpected counter-coup where Crimea and the Donbass broke away. And they broke away with essentially a military backstop that NATO was highly unprepared for at the time. They had one last Hail Mary chance, which was the Crimea annexation vote in 2014. And when the hearts and minds of the people of Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation, that was the last straw for the concept of free speech on the internet in the eyes of NATO. As they saw it, the fundamental nature of war changed at that moment. And NATO at that point declared something that they first called the Gerasimov Doctrine.
It almost seems like they are just, I don't know, trying to get power?
Which is named after this Russian military general who they claimed made a speech that the fundamental nature of war has changed. You don't need to win military skirmishes to take over Central and Eastern Europe. All you need to do is control the media and the social media ecosystem, because that's what controls elections. And if you simply get the right administration into power, they control the military. So it's infinitely cheaper than conducting a military war to simply conduct an organized political influence operation over social media and legacy media. An industry had been created that spanned the Pentagon, the British Ministry of Defense, and Brussels into a organized political warfare outfit.
If if I was on the outside looking in, and I looked at this with an untainted mind, and I could just look at this honestly, it would seem so obvious to me that this is what's happening. It would seem so obvious. But it feels like if you talk about it, you're the crazy one.
Essentially infrastructure that was created, initially stationed in Germany and in Central and Eastern Europe, to create psychological buffer zones, basically to create the ability to have the military work with the social media companies to censor Russian propaganda or to censor domestic right-wing populist groups in Europe who were rising in political power at the time because of the migrant crisis. So you had the systematic targeting by our State Department, by our IC, by the Pentagon, of groups like Germany's AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland there, and for groups in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Now,
I know I honestly look to Estonia when I'm looking for true freedom.
Now, when Brexit happened in 2016, that was this crisis moment where suddenly they didn't have to worry just about Central and Eastern Europe anymore. It was coming westward, this idea of Russian control over hearts and minds. And so Brexit was June 2016. The very next month at the Warsaw Conference, NATO formally amended its charter to expressly commit to hybrid warfare as this new NATO capacity. So they went from, basically 70 years of tanks to this explicit capacity building for censoring tweets if they were deemed to be Russian proxies. And again,
I mean, we used to be a proper society.
It's not just Russian propaganda. These were now Brexit groups or groups like Matteo Salvini in Italy or in Greece or in Germany or in Spain with the Vox Party. And now at the time, NATO was publishing white papers saying that the biggest threat NATO faces is not actually a military invasion from Russia. It's losing domestic elections across Europe to all these right-wing populist groups who, because they were mostly working-class movements, were campaigning on cheap Russian energy at a time when the U.S. was pressuring this energy diversification policy. And so they made the argument, after Brexit, now the entire rules-based international order would collapse unless the military took control over media, because Brexit would give rise to Frexit in France with Marine Le Pen, to Spexit in Spain with the Vox Party, to Italexit in Italy.
Well, they tried their best to make Brexit, you were a Nazi, you were insane, you were a terrorist, whatever, but the people spoke.
To Grexit in Germany, to Grexit in Greece, the EU would come apart, so NATO would be killed without a single bullet being fired. And then not only that, now that NATO's gone,
Spexit does kind of sound a little dirty.
Now there's no enforcement arm for the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, or the World Bank. So now the financial stakeholders who depend on the battering ram of the national security state would basically be helpless against governments around the world. So from their perspective, if the military did not begin to censor the internet, all of the democratic institutions and infrastructure that gave rise to the modern world after World War II would collapse. So you can imagine the reaction
may I ask you to
5 months
pause
later, Donald
right
Trump
there?
won the 2016 election.
So you just told a remarkable story that I've never heard anybody explain as lucidly and crisply as you just did. But did anyone at NATO or anyone at the State Department pause for a moment and say, wait a second, we've just identified our new enemy as democracy within our own countries? I think that's what you're saying. They feared that the people, the citizens of their own countries, would get their way, and they went to war.
Well, we can't have that. We can't have citizens getting what they pay for and what they want, because then they'll expect that for everything. They'll expect the government to actually take care of them, defend their borders, and help cut down on crime, try to improve their lives instead of doing it for foreign countries.
Against that.
Yes. Now, there's a rich history of this dating back to the Cold War. The Cold War in Europe was essentially a similar struggle for hearts and minds of people, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. Yes. In these sort of Soviet buffer zones. And starting in 1948, the national security state was really established then. You had the 1947 Act, which established the Central Intelligence Agency. You had this new world order that had been created with all these international institutions. And you had the 1948 UN Declaration on Human Rights, which forbid the territorial acquisition by military force. So you can no longer run a traditional military occupation government in the way that we could in 1898, for example, when we took the Philippines. Everything had to be done through a sort of political legitimization process whereby there's some ratification from the hearts and minds of people within the country. Now, often that involves simply puppet politics.
Well, the thing is, they've given up on the hearts and minds thing. They've completely given it up. They're now, if you're complaining, shut up. That's what the response is. If you're complaining about hearts and minds, shut up. I don't believe you. I don't trust you. I don't like what you're doing. Shut up, loser, racist, Nazi. NATO is useless? Yeah. Yeah. Steve Dave, well, the communists are going to win. The ratio is worse than I am. Smash the button, dipshits. Thank you, Steve Dave. And no, the communists won't win if we have a good like ratio. I mean, we could eat the NSA too, but the like ratio.
Politicians who are groomed as emerging leaders by our State Department. But the battle for hearts and minds had been something that we had been giving ourselves a long moral license leash, if you will, since 1948. One of the godfathers of the CIA, George Kennan, at 12 days after we rigged the Italian election in 1948, by stuffing ballot boxes and working with the mob, we published a memo called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare, where he said, listen, it's a mean old world out there. We at the CIA just rigged the Italian election. We had to do it because if the communists won, maybe there'd never be another election in Italy again. So, but it's really effective, guys. We need a Department of Dirty Tricks to be able to do this around the world. And it's essentially a new social contract we're constructing with the American people, because this is not the way we've conducted diplomacy before. But we are now forbidden from using the War Department. In 1948, they also renamed the War Department to the Defense Department. So again, as part of this diplomatic onslaught for...
Hey, that's an interesting rebrand, isn't it?
...for political control rather than it looking like it's overt military control. But essentially what ended up happening there is we created this foreign domestic firewall, we said, that we have a Department of Dirty Tricks to be able to rig elections, to be able to control media, to be able to meddle in the internal affairs of every other plot of dirt in the country. But this sort of sacred dirt on which the American homeland sits, they are not allowed to operate there. The State Department, the Defense Department, and the CIA are all expressly forbidden from operating on U.S. soil. Of course, this is so far from the case, it's not even fun.
Hey, does anybody believe for just a quintillionth of a second that these groups are not operating on American soil, let alone actively spying on American citizens?
Funny, but that's because of a number of laundering tricks that they've developed over 70 years of doing this. But essentially, there was no moral quandary at first with respect to the creation of the censorship industry when it started out in Germany and in Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and in Sweden and Finland. There began to be a more diplomatic debate about it after Brexit, and then it became full throttle when Trump was elected. And what little resistance there was washed over by the rise and saturation of Russiagate, which basically allowed them to not have to deal with the moral ambiguities of censoring your own people, because if Trump was a Russian asset, you no longer really had a traditional free speech issue. It was a national security issue. It was only after Russiagate died in July 2019 when Robert Mueller basically choked on the stand for 3 hours and revealed he
And how much money, taxpayer money, did we spend on that?
had absolutely nothing after 2.5 years of investigation, that the foreign to domestic switcheroo took place, where they took all of this censorship architecture spanning DHS, the FBI, the CIA, the DOD, the DOJ, and then the thousands of government-funded NGO and private sector mercenary firms were all basically transited from a foreign predicate, a Russian disinformation predicate, to a democracy predicate by saying that disinformation is not just a threat when it comes from the Russians, it's actually an intrinsic threat to democracy itself. And so by that, they were able to launder the entire democracy promotion regime change toolkit just in time for the 2020 election.
I mean, it's almost beyond belief that this has happened. I mean, my own father worked for the U.S. government in this business, in the information war against the Soviet Union, and, you know, was a big part of that. And the idea that any of those tools would be turned against American citizens by the U.S. government was, I want to think, was absolutely unthinkable in, say, 1988. And you're saying that there really hasn't been anyone who's raised objections, and it's absolutely turned inward to manipulate and rig our own elections as we would in, say, Latvia?
Yeah, well, as soon as the democracy predicate was established, you had this professional class of professional regime change artists and operatives. That is, the same people who argue...
I want to hear that one more time. That's good. Hold on.
As soon as the democracy predicate was established, you had this professional class of professional regime change artists and
professional regime change artists. Ooh. That's pretty good. I want to keep that one tucked aside. I trust Eve before I trust the government. Well, Eve's fat and lazy. I would trust Eve with a cheeseburger unwrapped and sitting unattended than before I would trust the government, though.
Operatives. That is, the same people who argued that, you know, we need to bring democracy to Yugoslavia to get, and that's the predicate for getting rid of, you know, Milosevic or any other country around the world where we basically overthrow governments in order to preserve democracy. Well, if the democracy threat is homegrown now, then that becomes, then suddenly these people all have new jobs moving on the U.S. side, and I can go through a million examples of that. But one thing on what you just mentioned, which is that, you know, from their perspective, they just weren't ready for the internet. 2016 was really the first time that social media had reached such maturity that it began to eclipse legacy media. I mean, this was a long time coming. I think folks saw this building from 2006 through 2016. You know, Internet 1.0 didn't even have social media. From 1991 to 2004, there was no social media at all. 2004, Facebook.
It was AOL.
Came out. 2005, Twitter. 2006, YouTube. 2007, the smartphone. And so, and in that initial period of social media, nobody was getting subscriberships at the level where they actually competed with legacy news media. But over the course of being, you know, so initially even these dissident voices within the U.S., even though they may have been loud in moments, they never reached 30 million followers. They never reached, you know, a billion impressions a year type thing. As a uncensored, mature ecosystem allowed citizen journalists and independent voices to be able to outcompete legacy news media. This indeed.
Why the hell does this guy think that people are not trying to get their word and their thoughts out there? When now you cannot. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all these companies, YouTube cannot just outright ban you for merely saying something that goes against the mainstream. They can't do that. But what they do is they make it so your shit doesn't show up, isn't seen by other people, nobody can find it. They shadow ban you into oblivion. That way they can go, you know, maybe, I don't know, he's just not that popular. They do that. They can't outright ban you. So this guy going, well, do we just need more people saying it? People are trying to say it. But when the people in charge don't let you, we can only do so much.
Produced a massive crisis both in our military and in our State Department and intelligence services. And I'll give you a great example of this. In 2019, at a meeting of the German Marshall Fund, which is, you know, an institution that goes back to the U.S. Basically, I don't want to say bribe, but essentially the soft power, economic soft power projection in Europe as part of the reconstruction of European governments after World War II to be able to essentially pay them with Marshall Fund dollars, and then in return they basically were under our thumb in terms of how they reconstructed. But the German Marshall Fund held a meeting in 2019. They held 1 million of these, frankly, but where a 4-star general got up on the panel and said that what happens. He posed the question: what happens to the U.S. military? What happens to the national security state when the New York Times is reduced to a medium-sized Facebook page? And he posed this thought.
Nothing. They're the ones propping the New York Times up. Nothing happens to them. It's people flock to the same social media and news sources because they want their own thought process reinforced.
Experiment as an example of we've had these gatekeepers. We've had these bumper cars on democracy in the form of a century-old relationship with legacy media institutions. I mean, our mainstream media is not in any shape or form, even from its outset, independent from the national security state.
Thank you. Confirmation bias. That's what I was looking for.
State Department, from the War Department. You had the initial, all of the initial broadcast news companies, NBC, ABC, and CBS, were all created by Office of War Information veterans from the War Department's effort in World War II. You had these Operation Mockingbird relationships from the 1950s to the 1970s.
But these were all conspiracy theories until they weren't. And they were all just made up until they weren't.
Those continued through the use of the National Endowment for Democracy and the privatization of intelligence capacities in the 1980s under Reagan. There's all sorts of CIA reading room memos you can read even on CIA.gov about those continued media relations throughout the 1990s. And so you always had this backdoor relationship between the Washington Post, the New York Times, and all of the major broadcast media corporations. And by the way, Rupert Murdoch and Fox are part of this as well. Rupert Murdoch was actually part of the National Endowment for Democracy coalition in 1983 when it was formed as a way to do CIA operations in an above-board way after the Democrats were so ticked off at the CIA for manipulating student movements in the 1970s. But essentially, there was no CIA intermediary to random citizen journalist accounts. There was no Pentagon backstop. You couldn't get a story killed. You couldn't have this favors for favors relationship. You couldn't
favors for favors is literally how these things work. It is such an incestuous ecosystem with these people. It's insane. The Washington Post is owned by Bezos. Bezos has contracts with CIA. Incestuous. What's up, Drunksley?
Promise access to some random person with 700,000 followers who's got an opinion on Syrian gas.
Well, it's like Brooklyn Dad was found out to be a paid operative.
And so this induced, and this was not a problem for the initial period of social media from 2006 to 2014 because there were never dissident groups that were big enough to be able to have a mature enough ecosystem on their own. And all of the victories on social media had gone in the way of where the money was, which was from the State Department and the Defense Department and the intelligence services. But then as that maturity happened,
Poltergeist, yes, you are very late.
Now had this
Jesus
situation after the 2016 election where they said, okay, now the entire international order might come undone. 70 years of unified foreign policy from Truman until Trump are now about to be broken. And we need the same.
I see all these new people rolling up in the chat, not hitting the like button, which is what you should be doing, and sharing it out on social media. And you know the rest, the stuff and the things are in the below, yay.
Analog control systems we had to be able to put bumper cars on bad stories or bad political movements through legacy media relationships and contacts. We now need to establish and consolidate within the social media companies. And the initial predicate for that was Russiagate, but then after Russiagate died and they used a simple democracy promotion predicate, then it gave rise to this multi-billion-dollar censorship industry that joins together the military-industrial complex, the government, the private sector, the civil society organizations, and then this vast cobweb of media allies and professional fact-checker groups that serve as this sort of sentinel class that surveys every word on the internet.
Damn, this guy's a little black pilling. Wow.
So, can you give us, and thank you again for this almost unbelievable explanation of why this is happening. Can you give us an example of how it happens? Just pick one among, I know, countless examples of how the national security state lies to the population, censors the truth in real life.
Yeah, so, we have this State Department outfit called the Global Engagement Center, which was created by a guy named Rick Stengel, who described himself as Obama's propagandist-in-chief. He was the Undersecretary for Public Affairs, which is essentially the liaison office role between the State Department and the mainstream media. So this is basically the exact nexus where government talking points about war or about diplomacy or statecraft get synchronized with mainstream media. So
and
he was in charge of that.
May I add something to that? As someone, I know Rick Stengel, he was at one point a journalist, and Rick Stengel has made public arguments against the First Amendment and against free speech. And somehow
anybody in government or journalism who actively makes arguments against the First Amendment, everything they say forthwith or at all should be disregarded completely, and they should be drummed out, and that should be scarlet letter shit.
Wrote a whole book on it, and he published an op-ed in 2019. He wrote a whole book on it, and he made the argument that we just went over here, that essentially the Constitution was not prepared for the internet, and we need to get rid of the First Amendment accordingly. And he described himself as a free speech absolutist when he was the managing editor of Time magazine, and even when he was in the State Department under Obama, he started something called the Global Engagement Center, which was the first government censorship operation within the federal government, but it was foreign-facing, so it was okay. Now, at the time, they used the homegrown ISIS predicate threat for this. And so it was very hard to argue against the idea of the State Department having this formal coordination partnership with every major tech platform in the U.S. because at the time there were these ISIS attacks and we were told that ISIS was recruiting on Twitter and Facebook.
And YouTube, but there was never anything proven about that. Everyone was just kind of like, okay. But it was never happening.
And so the Global Engagement Center was established essentially to be a State Department entanglement with the social media companies to basically put bumper cars on their ability to platform accounts. And one of the things they did is they created a new technology, which it's called natural language processing. It is a artificial intelligence, machine learning ability to create meaning out of words in order to map everything that everyone says on the internet and create this vast topography of how communities are organized online, who the major influencers are, what they're talking about, what narratives are emerging or trending, and to be able to create this sort of network graph in order to know who to target and how information moves through an ecosystem. And so they began plotting the language, the prefixes, the suffixes, the popular terms, the slogans that ISIS folks were talking about on Twitter. When Trump won the election in 2016, everyone who worked at the State Department was expecting these promotions to the White House National Security Council under Hillary Clinton, who I should remind viewers, was also Secretary of State under Obama, actually ran the State Department. But these folks were all expecting promotions on November 8th, 2016, and were unceremoniously put out of jobs by a guy who was a 20-to-1 underdog, according to the New York Times, the day of the election.
What was it, 99.9% chance of Trump losing? Funny how that turned out. At least I think it is.
And when that happened, these State Department folks took their special set of skills, coercing governments for sanctions. The State Department led the effort to sanction Russia over the Crimea annexation in 2014. These State Department diplomats did an international roadshow to pressure European governments to pass censorship laws to censor the right-wing populist groups in Europe, and as a boomerang impact to censor populist groups who were affiliated in the U.S. So you had folks You had folks who went from the State Department directly, for example, to the Atlantic Council, which was this major facilitator between government to government censorship. The Atlantic Council is a group that was one of Biden's biggest political backers. They bill themselves as NATO's think tank. So they represent the political census of NATO, and in many respects, when NATO has civil society actions that they want to be coordinated to synchronize with military action in a region, the Atlantic Council essentially is deployed to consensus build and make that political action happen within a region of interest to NATO. Now, the Atlantic Council has 7 CIA directors on its board. A lot of people
That's very normal.
don't even know that 7 CIA directors are still alive, let alone all concentrated on the board of a single organization that's kind of the heavyweight in the censorship industry. They get annual funding from the Department of Defense, the State Department, and CIA cutouts like the National Endowment for Democracy. The Atlantic Council in January 2017 moved immediately to pressure European governments to pass censorship laws to create a transatlantic flank attack on free speech in exactly the way that Rick Stengel essentially called for to have U.S. mimic European censorship laws. One of the ways they did this was by getting Germany to pass something called NetzDG in August 2017.
It does seem that we are just a little bit downstream from what goes on over in the EU and Britain. They crack down on free speech. We will soon too.
17, which was essentially kicked off the era of automated censorship in the U.S. What NetzDG required was, unless social media platforms wanted to pay a $54 million fine for each instance of speech, each post left up on their platform for more than 48 hours that had been identified as hate speech, they would be fined basically into bankruptcy when you aggregate 54 million over tens of thousands of posts per day. And the safe haven around that was if they deployed artificial intelligence-based censorship technologies, which had been, again, created by DARPA to take on ISIS, to be able to scan and ban speech automatically. And this gave, I call these weapons of mass deletion. These are essentially the ability to censor tens of millions of posts with just a few lines of code. And the way this is done is by aggregating. Basically, the field of censorship science fuses together 2 disparate groups of study, if you will. There's the sort of political and social scientists who are the sort of thought leaders of what should be censored. And then there are the sort of quants, if you will. These are the programmers, the computational data scientists, computational linguistics. Every university, there's over 60 universities now who get federal government grants to do this censorship, the censorship work and the censorship preparation work.
Now, why is the government giving money to groups for censorship? I mean, I think we know why, but why?
Where what they do is they create these code books of the language that people use, the same way they did for ISIS. They did this, for example, with COVID. They created these COVID lexicons of what dissident groups were saying about mandates, about masks, about vaccines, about high.
You've got my vote, Luna.
Profile individuals like Tony Fauci or Peter Daszak or any of these others protected VIP individuals whose reputations had to be protected online. And they created these code books. They broke things down into narratives. The Atlantic Council, for example, was a part of this government-funded consortium, something called the Virality Project, which mapped 66 different narratives that dissidents were talking about around COVID, everything from COVID origins to vaccine efficacy. And then they broke down these 66 claims into all the different factual subclaims. And then they plugged these into these essentially machine learning models to be able to have a constant world heat map of what everybody was saying about COVID. And whenever something started to trend that was bad for what the Pentagon wanted or was bad for what Tony Fauci wanted, they were able to take down tens of millions of posts.
The fact that Fauci had the influence and power that he did is so fucking mind-blowing that we let that little hateful troll do what he did and have the sway that he did. We should be ashamed of the government that let him do that.
Did this in the 2020 election with mail-in ballots. It was the same
Wait.
groups.
May
And
I
I
ask
should
you?
say to
Wait,
bring-
I'm sorry. I just gotta have to. There's so much
This guy has a lot to say, to be honest.
here, and it's so shocking. So you're saying the Pentagon, our Pentagon, the U.S. Department of Defense, censored Americans during the 2020 election cycle?
Yes, they did this. They did.
Well, we know that for a fact. Like, that shouldn't even... We shouldn't even be talking about that. We know that that happened.
This through the so there's the two most censored events in human history, I would argue, to date, are the 2020 election and the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll explain, you know,
I could see that, definitely. I could definitely see that.
how I arrived there. So the 2020 election was determined by mail-in ballots. And I'm not weighing into the substance of whether mail-in ballots were or were not a legitimate or safe and reliable form of voting. That's a completely independent topic from my perspective than the censorship issue one. But the censorship of mail-in ballots is really one of the most extraordinary stories in our American history, I would argue. What happened is you had this plot within the Department of Homeland Security. Now, this gets back to what we were talking about with the State Department's Global Engagement Center. You had this group within the Atlantic Council and the foreign policy establishment, which began arguing in 2017 for the need for a permanent domestic censorship government office to serve as a quarterback for what they called a whole of society counter-misinformation, counter-disinformation alliance.
They just dress this up. It is really that Carlin bit on languages, isn't it? Every time it's just that Carlin bit. It's not a near miss. It's a near hit.
That just means censorship, the counter-mis-disinfo. But their whole of society model explicitly proposed that we need every single asset within society to be mobilized in a whole of society effort to stop misinformation online. It was that much of an existential threat to democracy. And so, but they fixated in 2017 that it had to be centered within the government because only the government would have the clout.
Guys, if you haven't been paying attention in the chat, Luna's trying to get people to vote for him. I believe he's got about 10 votes already, and he definitely said he would send an Awoo for every vote that he gets.
And the coercive threat powers and the perceived authority to be able to tell the social media companies what to do, to be able to summon a government-funded NGO swarm to create that media surround sound, to be able to arm an astroturfed army of fact-checkers, and to be able to liaise and connect all these different censorship industry actors into a cohesive, unified whole. And the Atlantic Council initially proposed with this blueprint called forward defense. It's not offense, it's forward defense, guys. They initially...
Forward defense. The language is... Honestly, it's impressive. It's not offense. We are practicing forward defense. This is impressive language.
Proposed that running this out of the State Department's Global Engagement Center because they had so many assets there who were so effective at censorship under Rick Stengel's steed and under the Obama administration. But they said, we're not going to be able to get away with that because we don't really have a national security predicate, and it's supposed to be foreign-facing. We can't really use that hook unless we have a sort of national security one. Then they contemplated parking it at the CIA. And they said, well, actually, there's two reasons we can't do that. The CIA is foreign-facing, and we can't really establish a counterintelligence threat to bring it home domestically. Also, we're going to need essentially tens of thousands of people involved in this operation, spanning this whole society model. You can't really run a clandestine operation that way. So they said, okay, well, what about the FBI? They said, well, the FBI would be great. It's domestic. But the problem is the FBI is supposed to be the intelligence arm of the Justice Department. And what we're dealing with here are not acts of law breaking. It's basically support for Trump, or if
well, that might as well be an act of law breaking according to these people.
If left-wing populists had risen to power like Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn, I have no doubt they would have done in the UK. They would have done the same thing to him there. They targeted Jeremy Corbyn and other left-wing populist NATO skeptical groups in Europe. But in the U.S., it was all Trump. And so essentially what they said is, well, the only other domestic intelligence equity we have in the U.S. besides the FBI is the DHS. So we are going to essentially take the CIA's power to rig and bribe foreign media organizations, which is a power they've had since the day they were born in 1947, And we're going to combine that with the power, with the domestic jurisdiction of the FBI by putting it at DHS. So DHS was basically deputized. It was empowered through this obscure little cybersecurity agency to have the combined powers that the CIA has abroad with the jurisdiction of the FBI at home.
This is... I hate this, honestly. Wow.
And the way they did this, how did a cyber...
That Civil War... That movie looks all right. I'm pretty interested...
Little,
Jesus. I'm pretty interested in checking that one out.
Cybersecurity agency get this power was they did a funny little series of switcheroos. So this little thing called CISA, they didn't call it the Disinformation Governance Board, they didn't call it the Censorship Agency, they gave it an obscure little name that no one would notice called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, who is
the cyber police and the state police.
Founder said, we care about security so much it's in our name twice. You know, everybody sort of closed their eyes and pretended, that's what it was. But it was created by act of Congress in 2018 because of the perceived threat that Russia had hacked the 2016 election, had physically hacked it, and so we needed the cybersecurity power to be able to deal with that. And essentially, on the heels of a CIA memo on January 6, 2017, and a same-day DHS executive order on January 6, 2017.
Isn't it just, at least to me, maybe I'm a little more naive than the average bear, but is anybody really paying attention that Hillary Clinton's sore loss turned into a lie that is still repeated to this day about fucking Russians and hacking and hundreds of millions and tens of whatever dollars spent because they just can't accept that nobody liked fucking Hillary Rodham Clinton? That bugs me way more than I think it should.
2017, arguing that Russia had interfered in the 2016 election, and a DHS mandate saying that elections are now critical infrastructure. You had this new power within DHS to say that cybersecurity attacks on elections are now our purview. And then they did...
And they try to say Russia influenced it with their like $3,000 in Facebook ads.
Two cute things. One, they said mis, dis, and malinformation online.
I did not hear malinformation. That's new.
Are a form of...
The left controls the narrative, and that is why I'm voting for you, Luna.
Cybersecurity attack. They are a cyber attack because they are happening online. And they said, well, actually, Russian disinformation is, we're actually protecting democracy and elections. We don't need a Russian predicate after Russiagate died. So just like that, you had this cybersecurity agency be able to legally make the argument that your tweets about mail-in ballots, if you undermine public faith and confidence in them as a legitimate form of voting, you were now conducting a cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure by articulating misinformation on Twitter. And just like
Hillary's the only person who could win or lose and still get a boatload of money. No, she lost a ton of money. Like her, what the hell was it? Her speaking engagements almost dried up immediately. They came back after a while, but it was like, okay, so you're here for the you're just here for the political sway. I mean, obviously you were, but yeah.
Now, what they did then is they
Wait,
then
so in other words,
maybe F20 now? Nice. That's a lot of Awoos.
Bunch of
complaining about election fraud is the same as taking down our power grid.
Yes, you could literally be on your toilet seat at 9:30 on a Thursday night.
I'm a morning pooper.
And tweet, I think that mail-in ballots are illegitimate.
The Clinton Foundation went nearly bankrupt after the loss. That's what I thought. Like, they lost a ton of money.
And you were essentially then caught up in the crosshairs of the Department of Homeland Security classifying you as conducting a cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure because you were doing misinformation online in the cyber realm, and misinformation is a cyber attack on democracy when it undermines public faith and confidence in our democratic elections and our democratic institutions. They would end up going far beyond that. They would actually define democratic institutions as being another thing that was a cyber security attack to undermine. And lo and behold, the mainstream media is considered a democratic institution.
That's interesting. Why? Why is the MSM a Democratic institution? We know it's a Democrat institution.
That would come later. What ended up happening was, in advance of the 2020 election, starting in April of 2020, although this goes back before, you had this essentially never-Trump neocon Republican DHS working with essentially NATO on the national security side and essentially the DNC, if you will, to use DHS as the launching point for a government-coordinated mass censorship campaign spanning every single social media platform on Earth in order to pre-censor the ability to dispute the legitimacy of mail-in ballots. And here's how they did this. They aggregated 4 different institutions, Stanford University, the University of Washington, a company called Graphica, and the Atlantic Council. Now, all 4 of these institutions, the centers within them, were essentially Pentagon cutouts. You had...
What? No way.
You had at the Stanford Internet Observatory, it was actually run by Michael McFaul. If you know Michael McFaul, he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia under the Obama administration, and he personally authored a 7-step playbook for how to successfully orchestrate a color revolution. That is, and part of that involved maintaining total control over media and social media, juicing up the civil society outfits, calling elections illegitimate in order to... Now, mind you, all of these people were...
But only some elections are illegitimate, guys. Remember that. The elections that they win, most secure elections in history. The elections that they lose, illegitimate.
Professional Russiagators and professional election delegitimizers in 2016. And then, well, I'll get to that in a sec. So Stanford University, nominally the Stanford Internet Observatory under Michael McFaul, was run by Alex Stamos, who was formerly a Facebook executive who coordinated with ODNI and with respect to Russiagate, taking down Russian propaganda at Facebook. So this is another liaison, essentially, to the national security state. And under Alex Stamos at Stanford Internet Observatory was Renee DiResta, who started her career in the CIA and wrote the Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian disinformation. And there's a lot more there that I'll get to another time. But the next institution was the University of Washington, which is essentially the Bill Gates University in Seattle, who is headed by Kate Starbird, who is basically 3 generations of military brass, who got her PhD in crisis informatics, essentially doing social media surveillance for the Pentagon and getting DARPA funding and working essentially with the national security state, then repurposed to take on mail-in ballots. The third firm, Graphica, got $7 million in Pentagon grants and got their start as part of the Pentagon's Minerva Initiative. The Minerva Initiative is the psychological warfare research center of the Pentagon. This group was doing social media spying and narrative mapping for the Pentagon until the 2016 election happened, and then were repurposed into a partnership with the Department of Homeland Security to censor 22 million Trump tweets, pro-Trump tweets about mail-in ballots. And then the fourth institution, as I mentioned.
I don't think he meant 22 million tweets about the mail-in ballots, but I do get his point. They were censoring Trump's Twitter. They were censoring everybody's Twitter who wasn't pro-Biden.
Was the Atlantic Council, who's got 7 CIA directors on the board. So one after another, it is exactly what Ben Rhodes described during the Obama era as the blob, the foreign policy establishment. It's the Defense Department, the State Department, or the CIA every single time. And of course, this was because they were threatened by Trump's foreign policy. And so while much of the censorship looks like it's coming domestically, it's actually by our foreign-facing Department of Dirty Tricks color revolution blob, who are professional government topplers, who were then basically descended on the 2020 election. Now, they did this. They explicitly said, the head of this election integrity partnership, on tape, and my foundation clipped them, and it's been played before Congress, and it's in a part of the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit now. But they explicitly said on tape that they were set up to do what the government was banned from doing itself. And then they articulated a multi-step framework in order to coerce all the tech companies to take censorship actions they said on tape the tech companies would not have done but for their pressure, which involved using threats of government force because they were the deputized arm of the government. They had a formal partnership with the DHS. They were able to use DHS's proprietary domestic disinformation switchboard to immediately talk to top brass at all
Again,
the tech companies.
The naming of this stuff is so incredible. The naming is absolutely beautiful. Disinformation, blah, blah, blah.
Takedowns. And they bragged on tape about how they got the tech companies to all systematically adopt a new terms of service speech violation ban called delegitimization, which meant any tweet, any YouTube video, any Facebook post, any TikTok video, any Discord posts, any Twitch video, anything on the internet that undermined public faith and confidence in the use of mail-in ballots or early voting drop boxes or ballot tabulation issued on election day was a prima facie.
But the thing is, the thing is, these things have been questioned forever and a day, but it's only now that you're not allowed to question them. Why? Because the right team, the correct team is using them as they see fit.
Terms of service violation policy under this new delegitimization policy that they only adopted because of pass-through government pressure from the Election Integrity Partnership, which they bragged about on tape, including the grid that they used to do this, and simultaneously invoking threats of government breaking them up or government stopping doing favors for the tech companies unless they did this, as well as inducing crisis PR by working with their media allies. So, and they said the government, DHS, could not do that themselves, and so they set up this basically constellation of State Department, Pentagon, and IC networks to run this pre-censorship campaign, which by their own math had 22 million tweets on Twitter alone. And mind you, they did this on 15 platforms. So this is hundreds of millions of posts, which were all scanned and banned or throttled so that they could not be amplified, or they exist in a sort of limited state purgatory, or had these frictions affixed to them in the form of fact-checking labels where you couldn't actually click through the thing, or you had to, it was an inconvenience to be able to share it. Now, they did this 7 months before the election because at the time
But they're allowed to do it. It's just, it is the way it is. They're allowed to get away with this stuff because who's going to get them in trouble? Republicans? Ha!
They were worried about the perceived legitimacy of a Biden victory in the case of a so-called red mirage blue shift event. They knew the only way that Biden would be able to would win mathematically was through the disproportionate Democrat use of mail-in ballots. They knew there would be a crisis because it was going to look extremely weird if Trump looked like he won by 7 states in November, and then 3 days later it comes out actually the election switched.
I have a feeling we're getting close to that policy violation thing again, so we got to be careful.
I mean, that would put the election crisis.
But if you're still here, guys, smash that like button. Please do the sharing and all that stuff. That is greatly appreciated. And if you want to support the show, support the channel, Streamlabs is listed down below. That is also very, very much appreciated. I'm sorry, I forgot to announce this at the beginning of the show. I did make the Gorilla Train GIF if we get a bunch of Gorilla Donos in a row. And I did make the Knights of the Awoo, the $777 Awoo. That is a dono that is currently active.
Of the Bush-Gore election on a level of steroids that the national security said, well, the public will not be prepared for. So what we need to do is we need to, in advance, we need to pre-censor the ability to even question legitimacy. This took out.
Wait. May I ask you to pause right there?
Key influences.
So what you're saying is, what you're suggesting is, they knew the outcome of the election 7 months before it was held.
It looks very bad. Certainly, what they did is.
Yes, Mike, it does look very bad.
And especially when you combine this with the fact that this is right on the heels of the impeachment, the Pentagon-led.
Which one?
CIA-led impeachment.
The gorilla regret. You know the gorilla regret, don't you? Come on, you've had to have seen that. What is it? 23. Oh, I haven't updated it over here. I think it's 2331. Let me double check that real quick. Hold, please.
It was Eric Cimarella from the CIA, and it was the VIN.
If you could unpiss my wife off, I'd take you up on that Awoo train. Well, why is she mad at you now? What'd you do? Oh, would she be mad if you did it? I don't know how I could undo that. But let me check this real quick, and I'll give you an answer on that. Yeah, 2331. Let me add that to the thing down below. I don't think it is annotated from where it was before. What I'm going to do, and I know this is a little way off. What did I say? 2331. 2, 3, 131. GRILLA. Gorilla. Yeah, it's a Gorilla Regret train. That's really fucking cool. I got a little. Oh, I don't have the GIF here. Shit. Okay, so never mind on that one. What I'm going to do. Oh shit, Luna. Yeah, maybe hold off on that. Damn it, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, what I'm going to do, and it's not going to be till the... It's going to have to be at the end of... it's going to have to be after April, because I'm working on some projects IRL. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an Awoo package for anybody who is a Knight of the Awoo who does join that. It's going to be a custom package. You're going to put some Eve stuff in there. It's going to be cool. But I do not have the RAM or the time to start working on that package until May. So that is a thing that's going to go out with it. I don't know if that will unpiss your wife off, but it is something to look forward to at that point. But I don't have the Gorilla GIF here. I don't know why. I thought I did. It's on my other computer.
From the Pentagon, who led the...
But I assume you haven't been home because of work, and if you want to make her feel good, surprise trip home. I don't know what kind of stuff your wife likes, but maybe it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be like an over-the-top thing. Maybe just send her favorite dinner to the house.
The impeachment of Trump in late 2019 over, in
flowers and candy is overrated. Women like to eat.
Alleged phone call around withholding Ukraine aid. This same network, which came straight out of the Pentagon hybrid warfare network, military censorship network created after the first, Ukraine crisis in 2014, were the lead architects of the Ukraine impeachment in 2019, and then essentially came back on steroids as part of the 2020 election censorship operation.
Now, it doesn't have to... Well, yeah, okay. But if flowers and candy seems very cliche. If you're trying to make a woman not be mad at you, though, what I would do is if I can't be there, I have other obligations, work or something, what I would do is I would figure out like DoorDash or something and just send them their favorite meal. Just shows up at the door, you get the delivered notification, go, hey babe, check outside real quick, I got you something, and it's her favorite food, whatever it is. Seafood boil, lobster, whatever, it's right there, bang.
But, from their perspective, I mean, it certainly looks like the perfect crime. These were the people, DHS at the time had actually federalized much of the National Election Administration through this January 6, 2017 executive order from outgoing...
Flowers and candy are cliche, but so are steak and blowjobs. Yes, but you don't see a woman wooing a guy with steak and beaches in a movie, holding up a door with a packet of steak and putting her hair up. That doesn't work. And we're also much more simple creatures.
Obama DHS head Jed Johnson, which essentially...
By the way, what up, Nunya? Still the leader of the Stacker Club out there.
Essentially wrapped all 50 states up into a formal DHS partnership. So DHS was simultaneously in charge of the administration of the election in many respects and the censorship of anyone who challenged.
I would work on me too. I'm not saying it wouldn't. But if you're trying to... You got to do something different. Steak and candy is not a bad idea, but it's not the same idea of your favorite dinner will be there in 20 minutes.
The administration of the election. This is like, putting essentially the defendant of a trial as the judge and jury of the trial. It was
but you're not
Well, we all know how it goes. Later, fake gamer cat. The government has investigated the government and found that the government did nothing wrong.
describing democracy. I mean, you're describing a country in which democracy is impossible.
What I'm essentially describing is military rule. I mean, what's happened with the rise of the censorship industry is a total inversion of the idea of democracy itself.
Look, chat, we did it. We worked together.
Democracy sort of
Look, I don't know what you're planning on doing, but don't buy a bunch of steak and go, you owe me a beach with this, okay? Just don't do that.
Draws its legitimacy from the idea that it is ruled by consent of the people being ruled. That is, it's not really being ruled by an overlord because the government is actually just our will expressed by our consent with who we vote for. The whole push after the 2016 election and after Brexit and after a couple of other, social media run elections that went the wrong way from what the State Department wanted, like the 2016 Philippines election, was to completely invert everything that we described as being the underpinnings of a democratic society in order to deal with the threat of free speech on the internet. And what they essentially...
The threat of free speech.
...actually said is we need to redefine democracy from being about the will of the voters to being about the sanctity of democratic institutions. And who are the democratic institutions? Oh, it's us. It's the military. It's NATO. It's the IMF and the World Bank. It's the mainstream media. It is the NGOs, and of course these NGOs are largely State Department funded or IC funded. It's essentially all of the elite establishments that were under threat from the rise of domestic populism that declared their own consensus to be the new definition of democracy. Because if you define democracy as being the strength of democratic institutions rather than a focus on the will of the voters, then what you're left with is essentially democracy is just the consensus-building architecture within the democratic institutions themselves. And from their
Oh, see, that's a good idea. That's thinking with your thinky brain.
perspective, that takes a lot of work. I mean, the amount of work these people do. I mean, for example, we mentioned the Atlantic Council, which...
Shit, maybe throw some of those Amish chocolates in there if that's still a thing.
Which is one of these big coordinating mechanisms for the oil and gas industry in a region, for the finance and the JP Morgans and the BlackRocks in a region, for the NGOs in the region, for the media in the region. All of these need to reach a consensus, and that process takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of work and a lot of negotiation. From their perspective...
Sinking further, I'm doing that thing where I tap the side of my nose and I point at you. I have been invited to a couple Amish dinners in my life. I used to buy the cat. Anyway, I've told the story. The food is fucking amazing. The Amish, it was the most fresh food I've ever eaten in my life. It is unbelievable.
That's democracy. Democracy is getting the NGOs to agree with BlackRock, to agree with the Wall Street Journal, to agree with the community and act.
That's because it's actual food. That's true.
Activist groups who are onboarded with respect to a particular initiative. That is the difficult vote-building process from their perspective. If at the end of the day, a bunch of populist groups decide that they like a truck driver who's popular on TikTok more than the carefully constructed consensus of the NATO military brass, well then from their perspective, that is now an attack on democracy. And this is what this whole branding effort was. And of course, democracy again has that magic regime change predicate where democracy is our magic watchword to be able to overthrow governments from the ground up in a sort of color revolution style whole of society effort to topple a democratically elected government from the inside. For example, as we did in Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych was democratically elected by the Ukrainian people, like him or hate him. I'm not even issuing an opinion there, but the fact is We color revolutioned him out of office. We January 6th him out of office,
Yes.
actually, to be frank. I mean, with respect to you had a State Department funded right sector thugs and, $5 billion worth of civil society money pumped into this to overthrow a democratically elected government in the name of democracy.
Well, yeah, Dutch or Dutch whatever. It's Mennonites, but the food is still good.
And they took that special set of skills home, and now it's here, perhaps potentially to stay. And this has fundamentally changed the nature of American governance because of the threat of one small voice becoming popular on social media.
May I ask you a question? So into that group of institutions that you say now define democracy, the NGOs, foreign policy establishments.
The Amish are kind of cunts, but they're set in their ways. They do what they do, and their cabinets are amazing. So we kept buying them.
You included the mainstream media. Now, in 2021, the NSA broke into my private text apps and read them and then leaked them to the New York Times against me. That just happened again to me last week. And I'm wondering how common that is for the intel agencies to work with so-called mainstream media like the New York Times to hurt their opponents.
Uh-oh. Luna, did you... Are you butt modding?
Well, that is the function of these interstitial government-funded non-governmental organizations and think tanks like, for example, we mentioned the Atlantic Council, which is NATO's think tank, but other groups like the Aspen Institute, which draws the lion's share of its funding from the State Department and other government agencies. The Aspen Institute was
All right, just making sure it was an accident.
busted doing the same thing with the Hunter Biden laptop censorship. You had this strange situation where the FBI had advanced knowledge of the pending publication of the Hunter Biden laptop story, and then magically the Aspen Institute, which is run by essentially former CIA, former NSA, former FBI, and then a bunch of sort of civil society organizations, all hold a mass stakeholder simulation, censorship simulation, a 3-day conference. This came out, and Yoel Roth was there. This is a big part of the Twitter file leaks, and it's been mentioned in multiple congressional investigations. But somehow the Aspen Institute, which is basically an addendum of the national security state, got the exact same information that the national security state spied on journalists and political figures to obtain, and not only leaked it, but then basically did a joint coordinated censorship simulator in September, 2 months before the election, in order, just like with the censorship of mail-in ballots, to be in ready position to pre-censor anyone online amplifying
Wait a second.
news story that had not even broken yet.
The Aspen Institute? So, which is, by the way, I've
Yes.
spent my life in Washington. It's kind of Walter Isaacson, formerly of Time Magazine, ran it, former president of CNN. I had no idea it was part of the national security state. I had no idea its funding came from the U.S. government. This is the first time I've ever heard that. But assuming what you're saying is true, it's a little weird that...
honestly, if the cat timed him out or banned him, maybe he should stay banned.
Walter Isaacson left Aspen Institute to write a biography of Elon Musk. Strange? Or no?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't read that book. From what I've heard from people, it's a relatively fair treatment. Just total speculation, but I suspect that Walter Isaacson has struggled with this issue and may not even firmly fall in one particular place, in the sense that Walter Isaacson did a series of interviews of Rick Stengel, actually with the Atlantic Council and in other settings, where he interviewed Rick Stengel specifically on the issue of the need.
I'm going to get in on it before Hammond Bean does. Stangelson sounds like a sex act.
Need to get rid of the First Amendment and the threat that free speech on social media poses to democracy. Now, at the time, I was very concerned. This was between 2017 and 2019 when he did these Rick Stengel interviews. I was very concerned because Isaacson expressed what seemed to me to be a highly sympathetic view about the Rick Stengel perspective on killing the First Amendment. Now, he didn't formally endorse that position, but it left me very skittish about Isaacson. But what I should say is, at the time, I don't think very many people, in fact, I know virtually nobody in the country had any idea how deep the rabbit hole went when it came to the construction of the censorship industry and how deep the tentacles had grown within the military and the national security state in order to buoy and consolidate it. Much of that, frankly, did not even come to public light until even last year. Frankly, some of that was galvanized by Elon Musk's acquisition and the Twitter files and the Republican turnover in the House that allowed these multiple investigations, the lawsuits like Missouri v. Biden and the discovery process there. And multiple other things like the Disinformation Governance Board, who, by the way, the interim head of that, the head of that, Nina Jankowicz, got her start in the censorship industry from this exact same clandestine intelligence community censorship network created after the 2014 Crimea situation. Nina Jankowicz, when her name came up in 2022 as part of the Disinformation Governance Board, I almost fell out of my chair because I had been tracking Nina's network for almost 5 years at that point when her name came up as part of the UK intercluster cell of a busted clandestine operation to censor.
They're still allowing discovery because they know it just isn't going to go anywhere, so there's no point in throwing a hissy fit about it. They can do all the discovery they want. Nothing's going to happen.
So the internet called the
They'll be able to get away with whatever.
Integrity Initiative, which was created by the UK Foreign Office and was backed by NATO's political affairs unit in order to carry out this thing that we talked about at the beginning of this dialogue, the NATO sort of psychological inoculation and the ability to kill so-called Russian propaganda or rising political groups who wanted to maintain energy relations with Russia at a time when the U.S. was trying to kill the Nord Stream and other pipeline relations.
Well, they did that.
Marine Le Pen and
Right.
Well, Nina Jankowicz was a part of this outfit, and then who was the head of it after Nina Jankowicz went down? It was Michael Chertoff, and Michael Chertoff was running the Aspen Institute cyber group, and the Aspen Institute then goes on to be the censorship simulator for the Hunter Biden laptop story, and then 2 years later, Chertoff is then the head of the Disinformation Governance Board after Nina is forced to step down.
Yeah, close friends.
Of course, Michael Chertoff was the chairman at Bay. Sorry.
Of course.
Michael Chertoff was the chairman of the largest military contractor in Europe, BAE Military. So it's all connected.
You've blown my mind so many times in this conversation that I'm going to need a nap directly after it's done. So
I need dinner.
Just got two more questions for you. One short, one a little longer. Short one is, for people who've made it this far, an hour in, and want to know more about this topic, and by the way, I hope you'll come back whenever you have the time to explore different threads of the story. But for people who want to do research on their own, how can your research on this be found on the internet?
Sure. So our foundation is foundationforfreedomonline.com. We publish all manner of reports on every aspect of the censorship industry, from what we talked about with the role of the military-industrial complex and the national security state, to what the universities are doing, to I sometimes refer to as digital MK Ultra. There's just the field of basically the science of censorship and how and the funding of these psychological manipulation methods in order to nudge people into different belief systems, as they did with COVID, as they did with energy and every sensitive policy issue is what they essentially had an ambition for. But so my foundation for freedomonline.com website is one way. The other way is just on X. My handle is @MikeBenCyber. I'm very active there and publish a lot of long-form video and written content on all of this. I think it's one of the most important issues in the world today.
So it certainly is. And so that leads directly and seamlessly to my final question, which is about X. And I'm not just saying this because I post content there, but I think objectively it's the last big platform that's freer.
It's a matter of time before this gets taken away, so we should enjoy it while it lasted. It's by no means perfect, but it's better than most.
Sort of free or more free. You post there too. But, we're at the very beginning of an election year with a couple of different wars unfolding simultaneously in 2024. So do you expect that platform can stay free for the duration of this year?
it's under an extraordinary amount of pressure, and that pressure is going to continue to mount as the election approaches. Elon Musk is a very unique individual, and he has a unique buffer, perhaps, when it comes to the national security state, because the national security state is actually quite reliant on Elon Musk properties, whether that's for the electrical, the green revolution when it comes to Tesla, and the battery technology there. When it comes to SpaceX, the State Department is hugely dependent on SpaceX because of its unbelievable sort of pioneering and saturating presence in the field of low Earth orbit satellites that are basically how our telecom system runs, to things like Starlink. There are dependencies that the national security state has on Elon Musk. I'm not sure he'd have as much room to negotiate if he had become the world's richest man selling, at a lemonade stand. So and if the national security state goes too hard on him by invoking something like CFIUS to sort of nationalize some of these properties, I think the shockwave that it would send to the international investor community would be irrecoverable at a time when we're engaged in great power competition. So they're trying to they're trying to sort of induce I think a sort of corporate regime change through a series of things involving a sort of death by 1,000 paper cuts. I think there are 7 or 8 different Justice Department or SEC or FTC investigations into Elon Musk properties that all started after his acquisition of X. But then what they're trying to do right now is what I call the transatlantic flank attack 2.0. We talked in this dialogue about how the censorship industry really got its start when a bunch of State Department exiles who were expecting promotions took their special set of skills in coercing European countries to pass sanctions on themselves, to cut off their own leg, to spite themselves in order to pass sanctions on Russia. They ran back that same playbook with doing a roadshow for censorship instead for sanctions. We're now witnessing, transatlantic flank attack 2.0, if you will, which is because they have lost a lot of their federal government powers to do this same censorship operation they had been doing from 2018 to 2022, in part because the House has totally turned on them, in part because of the media, in part because Missouri v. Biden, which won a slam dunk case actually banning government censorship at the trial court and appellate court levels, is now before the Supreme Court. They've now moved into 2 strategies. One of them is state-level censorship laws. California just passed a new law which the censorship industry totally drove from start to finish around they call it platform accountability and transparency, which is basically forcing Elon Musk to give over the kind of narrative mapping data that these CIA conduits and Pentagon cutouts were using to create these weapons of mass deletion, these abilities to just censor.
Yeesh.
Be quiet!
It's kind of scared me a little bit. I got the loads. Here's a tip and a vote. Thank you, Ravon. And I appreciate the vote.
For everything at scale because they had all the internal platform data. Elon Musk took that away. They're using state laws like this new California law to crack that open. But the major threat right now is the threat from Europe with something called the EU Digital Services Act, which was cooked up in tandem with folks like NewsGuard, which is run by, which has a board of Michael Hayden, head of the CIA, NSA, 4-star general. Rick Stengel is on that board, from the State Department's propaganda office. Tom Ridge is on that board from the Department of Homeland Security. Oh, and Anders Fogh Rasmussen is on that board. He was the General Secretary of NATO under the Obama administration. So you have NATO, the CIA, the NSA, 4-star general, DHS, and the State Department working with the EU to craft the censorship laws that now are the largest existential threat to X, other than potentially advertiser boycotts, because there is now disinformation is now banned as a matter of law in the EU.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We're probably not very far from that. I think we're going to see a lot of this mentality ramping up going forward, too.
And the EU is a bigger market for X than the U.S. There's only 300 million some people in the U.S. There's 450 million in Europe. X is now forced to comply with this brand new law that just got ratified this year, where they either need to forfeit 6% of their global annual revenue to the EU to maintain operations there, or put in place essentially the kind of CIA bumper cars, if you will, that I've been describing over the course of this in order to have an internal mechanism to censor anything that the EU, which is just a proxy for NATO, deems to be disinformation. And you can bet with 65 elections around the globe this year, you can predict every single time what they're going to define disinformation as. So
yeah, it's pretty simple.
that's the main fight right now is dealing with the transatlantic flank attack from Europe.
I've said this 5 times, but that's just one of the most remarkable stories I've ever heard, and I'm grateful to you for bringing it to us. Mike Benz, Executive Director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, and I hope we see you again.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, all right, guys. That will be, that's it for that, and that's it for me because I got food waiting for me. Guys, thank you for coming and hanging out. Thank you for all the incredible donations and conversation tonight. This was a good one. Guys, you have a lovely, lovely evening. I will see you tomorrow for the Sin and Sash stream at 3 p.m. And Night of the Diamond Spoon is still and will keep the stream boss. Yeah, we took a little tiny chunk out of him. But I will see you guys tomorrow. Later.